Okay, we're going to change the steering rack of a 1994 Toyota T100 pickup. She's been leaking oil right about there. Steering fluid, I should say. Okay, number 12 socket. That's what I meant to say. Number 12 socket for the bolts on this plastic cover. Okay, there's the linkage. That's the linkage to the steering wheel. Goes down that way, and I guess we got to pull this cover back and see what we get down there. That looks like a interesting connection. Having a camera is great to be able to stick down and see what's going on down there up close and personal where you normally can't get your head. So that's helped me a lot. I thought I could avoid moving this, but I moved this out of the way, taking it off here to give me some more swing room. Showing the wire brush I used to clean the threads. These bolts were very hard to move. I put a screwdriver through to stop the universal from spinning. Quite obvious these have to come out, and they were hard to remove, but I got it. This is the bolt that almost ruined everything. This is on the passenger side. There's a bolt on the top, and there's a bolt on the front, and there's a bracket with a rubber in between. Anyway, the socket, even with a close breaker bar, would not go on because there were lines on the top above it that were in the way. So the only way to do it was with a ring spanner. The big problem with this bolt is it comes through and then it's exposed to the elements, and the threads were so rusty that it wouldn't budge. I even put a pipe on the wrench. Eventually I ended up cutting the end of a wrench off. Yes, so I got the metric, the correct ring spanner, and ground off the end, number 19, and then put a stainless steel pipe on it, and that was the... Well, even having leverage on it didn't really solve the problem. I had to wire brush it, soak it with PB Blaster. It was so badly rusted, it would only turn a quarter turn at a time, even with all my might and all that extension. It took me the longest time to get that last bolt out. There was so much muck on these hydraulic lines, I was quite confused and worried that I didn't understand how they came loose, but they do come loose. You just got to spray gunk on it, clean it up some so you can see what's what. I moved the clamp back. That must be a low pressure line to see what was what with it. Anyway, everything came off all right, so that wasn't a big deal. And there's a little O-ring on the end, so I had to replace them, which was a little bit of a tricky bit of business trying to find the right O-ring. While I'm on the subject, I might as well finish. So those are the 3 O-rings I found, and the one to the right is the original O-ring. So the ones I found were a little fatter, and they were a little harder to go on. Actually, one of them, I think, to the bottom is closer. So one went on all right. The others were hard to stretch because the rubber was a little thicker, but they seem to work. So um, that's just one little tip. You'll probably find better luck finding the correct O-ring in the United States, but in the Bahamas, we have a limited supplies. So here's the rack out on the workbench, and the universal probably should have come off, but it wasn't going to come off, so I had to work it on the table. She looks pretty rusted. I had to beat it out with a little ball-peen hammer, pulling on it and tapping, and you can see it's pretty rusted inside. So that's got to be cleaned up. But this metal tube that came off with the bolts was actually the center of the bushings that were supposed to have rubber, which is really amazing. There was no rubber left. Now this is the bottom bolt, but look, the metal, I was wondering what that was. All the rubber was completely gone. Look at that, completely gone. So, and the same thing with this bolt here. Both of them, all the rubber was gone. This one was here. So So it's all the rubber was shot. Well, it's important here to release the tension by holding back on it and not cross-threading it. And just turn it until you make sure it threads properly. And take the tension by pulling a little bit back on it so that it's not forcing it to cross thread. Just going to tighten it up with a wrench. Looks like I got the clamp off here that needs to be put on there. This must be the low pressure line. Well, they're both in. I can't emphasize enough on how important it is not to cross thread. Everything's snug and tight here and looking good. Well, I have to apologize for how disorganized this video is, but the really key part to this video, the important part, is the fact that this linkage doesn't want to come apart or go back together very easily. And the reason being is there isn't a way to slip the linkage back enough to get this rod down the center of the universal. And the key to it was actually loosening the lower bolt, the cross bolt, and removing the top bolt on the side, on this particular side of the rack. The other side of the rack can actually stay tight. The rubber's flexible enough. Anyway, you pull back on the rack. I'm gonna put a little video in of what I did. But you pull back on the rack and it allows enough space here to join these two things and put the rubber bushing in place and slide it back together, because otherwise, if you leave the rack intact and you try to disconnect this linkage, it can't come apart unless you loose the rack. The other car I was dealing with didn't have this. You could disconnect everything without removing the rack. But in this case, the rack has to be at least slid back enough to get this linkage apart. And then putting it back together, you have to, and there's just enough play for it to go back hard and just enough to get the linkage together. And then you can put it all back together. I'm going to put the next clip in. Okay, I removed this bolt from up here, up in there, number 19 socket, and I loosed this right out to the end. Now what I want to do is pull this. Since the lines are flexible, she should go. Oh, she doesn't want to move now. I'm going to have to put down the camera. Tried prying, but that didn't work. So I pushed it in and pulled it out and jerked it, and there goes our part. So that's good. The linkage is undone. I guess I should explain what happened was I put the linkage together wrong the first time. I also found out that I didn't have it adjusted perfectly because I hadn't put the tie rod ends on, and so the wheel wasn't straight, so I had to redo it, and that's why you see me pulling it out and getting the rubber to drop out and having to rejoin together the linkage. So that's the explanation of why I was kind of doing it twice or three times. Yeah, there's one more thing to explain. Okay, to get this one free, I held that, and I did this with the other side too. Put PB Blaster on it, and then I bead on it with that piece of wood and got it to shake loose. It's pretty tight. I was told putting the ends on that you must count how many turns to try and get your alignment as close as it was originally. And actually I advise to realign everything even if you do it this way, because I somehow messed up. I'm not sure exactly why, but I ended up having to redo my alignment to get it right. I also made a big mistake and tried to do my alignment without turning the rubber. I should have really cut the tie strap so that it could spin the rubber. I guess I gave the rubber a hernia and ripped the rubber up. I don't know how it got so easily damaged. I couldn't really see what was happening because I had, I think, the cover back on the truck, so I couldn't see what was happening inside, and messed it right up. Fortunately, I had some spare rubbers that I had ordered previously when I saw my rubbers were bad. but they weren't exactly the right size, unfortunately, but I managed to make it work. So after I removed it, I took pictures of the damage. It was really strange the way it ripped and tore and made holes. It didn't make a lot of sense, but it really got ripped up badly by turning it. Um, so that was a big disappointment when I had to take the rod end off and slide on the new one, which really wasn't the exact size, but it was really a struggle to get it on. And they came with two different sizes, the package I had. I used the bigger one. There's a diameter difference. So this is the new dust cover back on, and I had to use a hose clamp, and then I tested it at full extension before putting the tie strap back, and then completely inwards to see that nothing was going wrong. Checked the other side, fully extended, and then squashed, and I was ready to rock and roll. What I did here is I filled it 3 times without running the engine, just to try and drain as much fluid into the lines without causing air to get in the system. So it'll obviously have to bleed air out, but my theory is to let it fill it up and just let it settle in as much as it can before running the engine. Normally you just fill it up and start the engine, but if you fill it up and let it sit, it'll drain in a good bit, and that'll put less air in the system. Well, I thought I would end with a nice picture of the truck. I think this was in 2012. Love this truck because you can lay a full sheet of 4x8 ply in the back and close the gate, and she lays flat. And that's a rare thing to find in a pickup. She runs great. She doesn't carry a lot of weight. She's got a nice suspension that kind of rides like a Cadillac, but she won't take a half-ton of or a full yard of dirt in the back or the tires rub. So she's not good for carrying heavy load, but she's a sweet truck.